All right, today we're diving into a story that really feels like a modern fable. It's about this one man who made three big promises. And, well, let's just say those promises led to his ultimate downfall.
And yeah, that number three, it's going to pop up a lot here. Because, you see, at the very height of his success, this guy didn't just have one wife, he had three. But hold on, this isn't some story about a guy who had it all. Nope. Because for every one of those wives, there was a confession. We're talking three confessions, and they changed everything. So you gotta ask, right? How does a life that looks so perfect on the outside, built on success, on wealth, just shatter? Like in one evening? To figure that out, we've got to go back and look at the foundation he built it all on. And let me tell you, that foundation, it was about as sturdy as a house of cards. At the very center of this whole thing was a man named Daniel. And Daniel had this very specific idea about how life and love were supposed to work. This right here, this was his entire philosophy. He saw himself as the provider. He genuinely thought that if you threw enough money at a problem, it would just go away. For him, things like love and loyalty, they weren't feelings. They were assets, like things on a balance sheet you could manage. And, this whole thing really kicked off with his very first promise. A promise that pretty much set the stage for everything else that came after. So picture this. He meets his first wife, Amina, way back when they had absolutely nothing. She was right there with him through all the dreams and all the debt. They literally built a business together from scratch. But as the money started rolling in, Daniel's big idea got locked in place. His job, his only real duty, the way he showed his love, was by writing checks. And this slide right here, this really nails the core issue. Daniel was playing a completely different game than everyone else. He was living by this one set of rules, but reality, actual human connection, operates on a totally different one. He thought a bigger bank account meant more loyalty, but loyalty, real loyalty, needs you to actually be there. He thought expensive gifts could replace a simple conversation, but you can't buy a real connection. It takes attention. So naturally, as his business empire got bigger, so did his ego. That whole provider philosophy he had, it convinced him that more was always the answer. More business deals, more money, and, you guessed it, a bigger family. For him, it was all just a show of power. And that way of thinking is exactly what led to this. First, he marries wife number 2, Layla. To him, she was like another trophy for his collection. Then came Nadia, the third wife, who was basically the final, ultimate symbol of his power. He even built this huge house, gave each wife their own space, and had this spreadsheet-like schedule for dividing his time. He was absolutely convinced he had created the perfect, balanced system. And this is where his math just went completely wrong. He honestly believed you could just divide up your time like slices of a pie, and that somehow love would just magically multiply to fill in all the empty spaces. But, yeah, we all know that's not how people work. Not at all. And it wasn't long before the consequences of that bad math started showing up. That strong foundation he was so proud of, well, it started to crack. And these weren't little cracks either. These were big, dangerous ones. Look, the guy provided everything you could buy. Cars, fancy clothes, amazing trips, you name it. But he was incredibly cheap with the one thing that actually mattered, just being present. Even when he was physically in the room, his head was somewhere else. In a meeting, on his phone, he was emotionally checked out, a million miles away. And for each of his wives, that disconnect was huge. You had Amina, his first partner, who had all the material comfort in the world but just wanted the connection they used to have. Then there's Layla, who got all the charm but none of the respect she craved. And finally, Nadia, who had all the financial support she could ask for, but what she really needed was just someone to be there, someone to pay attention. You know how these things go. The breakdown was slow until it was suddenly very, very fast. It went from two people sharing dreams under a tree to a massive, silent house where the only sound was late-night business calls. And then came the final signs, the ones we all recognize, right? Total silence at the dinner table, and phones that are suddenly password protected and always face down. And that brings us right back to where we started. To that one single evening, the moment when the price for all that absence, all that emotional distance, finally had to be paid. That night, his whole world just came crashing down. pillar by pillar. First, Amina calmly told him she'd found someone who actually saw her. Then, Layla confessed she'd found a man who respected her as an equal. And last, a tearful Nadia admitted she'd found comfort with someone who was just there, someone who actually listened when she talked about her passions. 3 wives, 3 confessions, all in one night.
So there he was, Daniel, sitting all alone right in the middle of this massive, expensive house he built. And for the very first time, he saw it for what it truly was. Not an empire, but a big, cold, empty box. All the warmth was gone because he'd let the connections that create that warmth just wither away. Talk about a hard lesson to learn, right? And he learned it way, way too late. The stuff that actually matters in life, loyalty, real connection, just paying attention to someone. You can't buy that stuff. There's no price tag. You can't hire someone to do it for you. It's something you have to give of yourself, freely.
And in the end, it was devastatingly simple. In his constant chase for more, he ended up with absolutely nothing.
So this whole story kind of leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? Daniel's whole philosophy was that strength came from quantity, how much you have, how many people you have. But his story, it really makes you wonder if true strength and maybe true love is all about quality, about depth. You know, how deeply, how presently you can show up for just one person. It's something to think about for sure.